A widow beaten for simply giving birth. A newborn child caught in the middle of a deadly struggle. And a promise that could change both of their lives forever. What happens when survival collides with destiny in the untamed West? Sarah Miller clutched her newborn daughter Elizabeth, so tightly it was a wonder the child could breathe. She stared out the grimy window of her cabin, seeing not the wild Wyoming territory of 1878, but a reflection of her own unforgiving life. At just 23, she was a widow. Her husband, Thomas, was 3 months gone, swallowed by a mining accident that felt like a lifetime ago. The walls of the cabin he'd built with his own 2 hands felt like they were shrinking, squeezing the very air from her lungs. This place was supposed to be a beginning. Now, it was just a wooden box to mark the end of her world. "Hush now, little one," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking. The baby stirred. A small, innocent life in a world that was anything but. "We'll be all right. We have to be." She rocked Elizabeth, the gentle motion a stark contrast to the violent ache in her side. The spot where her brother-in-law, William, had struck her yesterday was a fiery purple reminder of her new reality. He had shown up just hours after Elizabeth was born, his face a mask of greed, and his breath sour with whiskey. He didn't come to see his new niece. He came for the land. "A woman has no business owning property," he'd snarled, his words a slap before his hand followed. He'd demanded she sign the deed over. When she refused, his rage had erupted. The slap, then the shove that sent her crashing against the table. If Doc Peterson hadn't chosen that exact moment to check on them, William might have finished what he started. He'd stormed off, but his threats hung in the air like smoke. A sudden knock on the door made her jump. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she clutched Elizabeth even tighter. Was he back? Had he come to make good on his promise to throw her out? "Mrs. Miller," a deep voice called out. "It's Sheriff Daniels." Relief washed over her in a dizzying wave. She shuffled to the door and pulled it open. Sheriff James Daniels stood on her porch, a man whose face seemed carved from the rugged landscape itself. At 45, he was a pillar in Pinewood, a man known for his quiet fairness. He held his hat in his hands, his eyes filled with a weary concern. "Good morning, Sheriff," Sarah managed, trying to force a smile that her bruised cheek wouldn't allow. The sheriff's eyes narrowed, fixing on the ugly mark. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and serious. "Doc Peterson stopped by my office. He said there was trouble out here." Sarah looked down, adjusting the blanket around Elizabeth. She didn't want to be a burden. She didn't want to be the town gossip. "William came by," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He wants the land. He says it's his right, as Thomas's only brother." "And the bruise on your face?" the sheriff asked, though the set of his jaw told her he already knew the answer. There was no point in lying. "I wouldn't sign the papers," she admitted. "He lost his temper." The sheriff's jaw tightened until a muscle jumped. "That man's temper has been running hot ever since he started treating the saloon like his home." His gaze dropped to the small bundle in her arms, and for a moment, his hard expression softened. "You two shouldn't be out here alone. Not now." "I have nowhere else to go," Sarah said, the words catching in her throat. "This cabin, this land, it's all Thomas left us." Sheriff Daniels nodded slowly, thinking. "My sister Mary runs the boarding house in town. She's always looking for help. Cooking, cleaning. You and the little one would have a roof over your head, a safe place, at least until we can sort this out with William." Sarah shook her head. "I can't just abandon our home. Thomas built this for us." "It ain't abandoning if you mean to come back," the sheriff countered gently. "Right now, what matters is keeping you and this child safe. A piece of land ain't worth your life." Before she could form a reply, another sound cut through the morning quiet. Hoofbeats, fast and steady, kicking up a cloud of dust down the path. A lone rider was approaching. As he drew closer, Sarah recognized the powerful set of his shoulders and the confident way he sat his horse. It was Michael Bennett. He owned the largest ranch in the whole territory, a man spoken of in town with a mixture of respect and awe. The sheriff turned, his hand resting near the butt of his pistol. It was a habit, not a threat. Bennett, he said, his voice even. What brings you so far out? Michael Bennett swung down from his horse with an easy grace. He was 35, with dark hair just starting to gray at the temples, and eyes so blue they seemed to steal a piece of the sky. He took his hat off as he walked onto the porch, his gaze moving from the sheriff to Sarah. It lingered for a split second on her bruise before he respectfully looked away. "Sheriff," he nodded. "Mrs. Miller." He turned his attention back to the lawman. "I was riding my southern boundary. Saw William Miller in town earlier. He was drunk as usual, and bragging to anyone who'd listen that he was coming out here to claim this land, one way or another. I figured someone should check on the missus." A cold dread snaked its way up Sarah's spine. He was coming back. "Not if I'm here to stop him," Sheriff Daniels said, his voice hard as iron. But Michael Bennett stepped forward, his focus entirely on Sarah. "Mrs. Miller, I know we've only spoken in passing, but I considered Thomas a friend. I want to help." He paused, his blue eyes sincere. "My ranch, we have a small caretaker's cottage. It's empty. You and your daughter would be safe there. Welcome to stay as long as you need." Sarah was stunned, caught between the two men and their unexpected offers. Overwhelmed, grateful, and terrified all at once. Elizabeth began to fuss, a small whimper that echoed her mother's own distress. I appreciate your kindness, both of you," she said, her voice unsteady. "But I can't accept charity." "It wouldn't be charity," Michael replied smoothly. His voice was calm, reassuring. "The house needs looking after. And frankly, my ranch accounts are a disaster. I've been meaning to hire someone to sort them out. I understand you were a teacher back east. You can handle ledgers, I imagine?" Sarah nodded, a flicker of surprise on her face. "How did he know that about her?" "Then it's settled," Michael said, a small genuine smile touching his lips. "We'd be helping each other." Sarah stood in the doorway of her cabin, a place that had transformed from a symbol of hope to a cage of fear. She looked at the concerned face of the sheriff, then at the steady, confident gaze of Michael Bennett. William was coming back. She knew it in her bones, and her pride wasn't worth more than her daughter's life. Sometimes, courage wasn't about standing your ground. It was about knowing when to accept a lifeline. Her decision was made in a heartbeat. "When can we leave?" 2 weeks felt like a lifetime. Sarah stood in the cozy kitchen of the caretaker's cottage on the Bennett ranch, the smell of baking bread filling the small space. Elizabeth was asleep in a sturdy wooden cradle near the hearth. Michael had brought it over the day after they arrived, saying it had belonged to his sister's children. A simple act of kindness that had nearly brought Sarah to tears. The cottage was a godsend, modest but clean, with 2 small bedrooms and a sitting area that caught the morning sun. It was a quarter-mile from the main ranch house, close enough for safety but far enough for privacy. Her new life had found a rhythm. Mornings were spent at the main house, organizing years of disorganized ledgers and correspondence, while Elizabeth slept in a basket by her feet. Afternoons were for baking, mending, and simply breathing. Breathing in a way she hadn't realized she'd forgotten how to do. "You've brought order to my chaos," Michael had said just yesterday, looking over her neat columns of figures. The praise felt foreign, warming her in a way she hadn't felt in years. Thomas had been a good man, a kind man. But their marriage had been a practical arrangement, born of her desperation and his loneliness. His death had left her unmoored, but not shattered, a fact that filled her with a quiet, persistent guilt. The sound of hooves pulled her to the window. Michael and his men were returning from the north pasture. She watched him swing down from his horse, his movements fluid and strong. He said something to his foreman, and the men around him laughed. Then, as if he could feel her watching, he turned and looked directly at her cottage. Sarah ducked back from the window, her cheeks flushing. She was a mess, flour on her apron, her hair coming undone. She busied herself with the bread dough, her heart doing a strange little flutter at the thought of him walking over. He often did, just to check in. The knock came a few minutes later. She wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Miller," he said, holding his hat. "Just wanted to see that you and Elizabeth are settling in all right." "Please call me Sarah," she replied, a small smile finding its way to her lips. "And we are." Thank you, again, for everything. His own smile widened, crinkling the corners of his striking blue eyes. Then you must call me Michael. And it's hardly generosity when you're saving my ranch from being buried under a mountain of paperwork. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Sarah laughed. A real, genuine laugh. I've just put a loaf of bread in the oven, she heard herself say, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Would you care to join us for supper? It's just stew, but there's more than enough. Michael hesitated for a fraction of a second, and Sarah's heart sank. She'd overstepped. He was her employer, a powerful man. He wouldn't want to take a simple meal with her and a baby. I'd be honored, he said finally, his voice sincere. Let me get cleaned up at the main house. I'll be back in half an hour, if that's all right. Relief, and something else she couldn't quite name, washed through her. That would be perfect. He returned looking fresh, in a clean shirt, his dark hair still damp. The meal was comfortable, the conversation easy. He told her about inheriting the ranch from his father, about the hard years of building it into the success it was today. He asked about her life in Boston, about her teaching career, and he listened with an intensity that made her feel truly seen. And Thomas? He asked gently, as they drank coffee while Elizabeth slept soundly in her cradle. How did you meet? Sarah stared into the dark liquid in her cup. My father was a good man, but a poor investor. When he died, he left my mother and me with nothing but debts. Thomas was in Boston on business. He needed a wife to help him prove up his homestead claim. She trailed off, the shame of it still sharp. And I needed security. There's no shame in that, Sarah, Michael said, his voice soft. No, she whispered, forcing herself to meet his eyes. But there should be honesty. I respected Thomas deeply. He was kind to me. But I never loved him. Not the way a wife should. She took a shaky breath. Sometimes I feel like his death was a punishment for my failure to love him. Michael leaned forward, his expression serious. That's not how the world works, Sarah. Thomas's death was a terrible accident. It wasn't some divine judgment on a practical marriage. Before she could answer, the night was shattered by the thunder of approaching horses. They were riding hard, too hard. Michael was on his feet in an instant, his easygoing manner gone, replaced by a cold alertness. He moved to the window, peering into the darkness. Stay inside, he ordered, his voice like flint. It's William Miller, and he's not alone. Sarah's blood ran cold. She snatched Elizabeth from the cradle, the baby waking with a startled cry. Michael didn't hesitate. He stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door almost shut behind him, shielding them from view. Sarah crept to the window, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. William swung off his horse, swaying on his feet. He was flanked by two of the roughest-looking men Sarah had ever seen. They looked like wolves circling a kill. Bennett, William slurred, his voice thick with liquor and malice. I hear you're keeping something that belongs to me. Mrs. Miller and her daughter are under my protection, Michael said. His voice was unnervingly calm, but his stance was coiled, ready. You'd do well to turn your horse around and ride away, Miller. William spat a wad of tobacco juice into the dirt. That woman is sitting on my family's land. Thomas would have wanted me to have it, not some fancy schoolteacher from Boston who barely knew him a year. The crude words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She clutched Elizabeth closer, trying to shield her from the venom in the air. That's enough. Michael's voice cut through the night, sharp and deadly as a razor. The law says that land is hers. You need to accept that. William laughed, a nasty, broken sound. The law? He sneered, his hand dropping to the pistol holstered at his hip. Out here, a man makes his own law. Is that a threat? Michael asked, not moving a muscle. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't flinched. But the quiet deadliness in his tone was more terrifying than any shout. The two men with William shifted on their feet. They hadn't signed up for a fair fight with Michael Bennett. His reputation with a gun was legendary in these parts. One of them nudged William. Come on, Bill. He ain't worth it. William hesitated, his drunken gaze flickering between Michael's unmoving form and the dark windows of the cottage. "This ain't over," he finally snarled, climbing clumsily back onto his horse. "That woman and her brat don't belong here. They'll come to a bad end. Mark my words." "Get off my property," Michael said, his voice flat and final. "And if you ever come back, you'll be leaving in a pine box." The threat hung in the air for a long, tense moment before William yanked his reins and galloped away, his hired guns scrambling to follow. Michael stood watching until they were out of sight before he finally came back inside. Sarah was trembling, her whole body shaking with fear and adrenaline. He crossed the room in 2 strides, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "Are you all right?" he asked, his blue eyes searching her face. She could only nod, the lump in her throat too big to speak around. "He won't touch you," Michael promised, his voice a low, fierce growl. "He won't touch either of you, I swear it." Sarah looked up into his determined face, and in that moment, she felt something she hadn't felt since before Thomas died. Safe. But as his hand stayed on her shoulders, a warm and steady pressure, she felt something else too. Something far more dangerous. A connection, a current passing between them that had nothing to do with protection, and everything to do with a feeling she had no right to have. Not for her employer. Not as a new widow. And she had the terrifying thought that maybe, just maybe, he felt it too. The Wyoming autumn bled across the landscape, painting the cottonwoods in shades of gold and fire. 3 months had passed. 3 months since Sarah and Elizabeth had found sanctuary on the Bennett Ranch. The caretaker's cottage now felt more like a home than the cabin ever had. Elizabeth was thriving, a chubby, happy baby of 4 months who had started to smile whenever Michael came to visit. And he visited often. Sarah was outside, hanging sheets on the line. The crisp air felt good on her face. From where she stood, she could see the main corral, where a few of the ranch hands were breaking a wild Mustang. Michael was there, in the middle of it all, his voice carrying on the wind as he gave instructions. Martha Jensen, the ranch's housekeeper, came trudging up the path with a basket of folded laundry. Martha was a 50-year-old widow with a no-nonsense attitude and a kind heart, and she had taken Sarah under her wing from day one. "That little one is sprouting like a weed," Martha commented, nodding at Elizabeth, who was gurgling happily in her basket in a patch of sun. "She's got her father's eyes, that one." Sarah paused, a clothespin in her hand. "Yes," she said quietly. Thomas had blue eyes. Martha shot her a look, her own eyes sharp and knowing. "Wasn't talking about your late husband, dear. Everyone knows the Miller boys have eyes as brown as dirt. Now that baby's eyes, they remind me of someone else around here." A hot blush crept up Sarah's neck. "Martha, you shouldn't say things like that. Thomas was her father." "Of course he was," Martha said, a little too quickly. "It's just curious. How Mr. Bennett can't seem to take his eyes off either of you. Haven't seen him look at anyone that way since his wife Rebecca passed." Sarah nearly dropped the sheet. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Michael was married? He had a child? Martha's eyes went wide with shock. "Lord, have mercy. He never told you." She lowered her voice. "It was 8 years ago. His wife Rebecca died in childbirth. The baby, a little boy, he died with her. It was a terrible, terrible thing. Michael. He wasn't right for years after. Just buried himself in this ranch." The revelation hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. All this time, all their suppers, all their conversations, he had never said a word. She thought of the way he held Elizabeth, so gentle and careful. She thought of the fleeting moments of sadness she'd seen in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. Now, it all made a terrible kind of sense. "I had no idea," Sarah whispered. "He keeps it locked up tight," Martha said softly. "But anyone with eyes can see the change in him since you and that baby came. The light's back on. Even the ranch hands see it." Before Sarah could process this, the sound of an approaching wagon pulled their attention toward the main drive. It was Sheriff Daniels, and sitting beside him was Judge Parker, the circuit judge who presided over all legal matters in the territory. Now what in the world brings them all the way out here? Martha wondered aloud. Court's not in session till next week. A sudden, cold feeling of dread settled in Sarah's stomach. She scooped Elizabeth into her arms. "Martha, could you finish this? I think I should go see what they want." By the time she reached the main house, Michael was already on the porch talking to them. His expression was grim. When he saw her approaching with Elizabeth, it darkened even more. "Sarah," he called, coming down the steps to meet her. "The judge has some news. Let's go inside." They sat in Michael's study, the room filled with the smell of leather and old books. Judge Parker, a large man with a booming voice, looked at her with solemn eyes. "Mrs. Miller," he began, his tone heavy, "I'm afraid I have some troubling news. Your brother-in-law, William Miller, has filed a legal petition. He's challenging your fitness as a mother, and he's challenging your right to inherit your late husband's property." Sarah's arms tightened around Elizabeth. "On what grounds?" The judge cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "He alleges impropriety in your living arrangements here. He claims you have entered into an immoral relationship with Mr. Bennett while still in your mourning period. He's using it to question your character." "That's absurd." Michael slammed his fist on the desk, making the inkwell jump. "Sarah is my bookkeeper. This is a business arrangement." The judge held up a hand. "Furthermore," he continued, his eyes full of reluctance, "he is officially questioning the paternity of the child." Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. "He claims the timing of the pregnancy, combined with certain physical characteristics of the baby, suggests that she is not his brother's daughter." "How dare he?" she whispered, the words like glass in her throat. "Thomas is her father. She was born 7 months after he died. She was premature." "I understand this is deeply distressing," Judge Parker said, "but William is forcing my hand. If he can convince a court that Elizabeth is not Thomas's legal heir, then the Miller property would fall to him, and you would lose your claim as her guardian." Michael was at her side in an instant, a solid, reassuring presence. "This is nothing but a spiteful land grab, Judge. William has been threatening her from the beginning. The sheriff knows it." The sheriff, who had been standing quietly by the door, nodded. "He's right, Judge. William's been drinking hard and running his mouth all over town. He wants that land." "Regardless," the judge sighed, "the petition has been filed. A formal hearing will be held in Pinewood next Thursday. Mrs. Miller, you will be required to testify." "And until then?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. "Until then, nothing changes," the judge said. "But I would strongly advise discretion." After they left, Sarah sat frozen in the leather chair, Elizabeth asleep in her arms. The world had shrunk to the 4 walls of this room. "He won't win," Michael said, his voice a low growl. He knelt beside her chair. "We'll fight him." "You shouldn't have to," she said, tears finally spilling over. "This is my fight. My burden." He took her free hand, his grip warm and strong. "Look at me, Sarah." When her tear-filled eyes met his, he spoke with a fierce intensity. "You and Elizabeth stopped being a burden the second you set foot on this ranch. You've become important to me. Very important." There was a depth in his eyes she hadn't seen before, a raw emotion that stole her breath. "Michael," she began, but he shook his head. "I know the timing is all wrong, but I need you to know. I will do whatever it takes to protect you both." Looking down at their joined hands, she knew she couldn't let him fight for her based on a lie. The secret she had guarded so fiercely felt like a lead weight in her gut. "There's something you need to know," she said, her voice barely audible. "About Thomas. About me." Michael waited, his gaze unwavering. "Our marriage, it wasn't a love match. It was an arrangement. Thomas needed a wife, and after my father died, I needed security. We were friends, partners, but we were never truly husband and wife." Understanding and something else, pity, dawned in Michael's eyes. "Sarah, are you saying—" "Yes," she confirmed, unable to look at him. "Thomas was already very sick when we married. The mines had ruined his lungs. He wanted to build a life for us. but he just got worse so quickly. She took a deep, shuddering breath and forced herself to say the words that could destroy everything. Elizabeth is not his biological child, he knew. He gave her his name anyway, just before he died. He promised to raise her as his own. The silence in the room was deafening. Michael sat back on his heels, his face a mask of shock as he processed her confession. This was it. This was the moment he would pull his hand away, the moment the kindness in his eyes would curdle into disgust. He would see her for what she was, a fallen woman, a liar. But he didn't pull his hand away. Instead, he raised it to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss against her knuckles. "Thank you," he said softly, "for trusting me with the truth." Sarah stared at him, bewildered. "You're not disappointed in me?" "Disappointed?" he replied, a look of disbelief on his face. "Sarah, how could I be? You've faced every awful thing this world has thrown at you with courage and dignity. If anything, this makes me admire you even more." The relief was so overwhelming it felt like a physical wave, washing the tension from her body. "What do we do now?" she whispered. "If the judge finds out—" "The judge needs to know only one thing," Michael said, his voice firm and resolute again. "That Thomas Miller claimed Elizabeth as his daughter, which he did. And with that truth, we will fight William's lies, and we will win." As the afternoon sun slanted through the window, Sarah felt a fundamental shift between them. It wasn't just protection anymore. It was a partnership. And in his steady blue eyes, she saw the promise of a future she had never, ever dared to imagine for herself. The day of the hearing, the Pinewood Courthouse was packed. It felt like every man, woman, and child from a 50-mile radius had crammed onto the wooden benches, their faces a sea of morbid curiosity. Sarah sat at the defendant's table, her back ramrod straight, her hands clenched in her lap. Michael sat beside her, his presence a silent anchor in the storm of whispers and stares. William was across the aisle, looking unnervingly clean and sober in a borrowed suit. Next to him sat his lawyer, a man named Caldwell from Denver, with a face as sharp and cold as a winter morning. When Judge Parker called the court to order, a hush fell over the room. Caldwell rose to his feet. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth as oiled leather. "We are here today because my client, Mr. William Miller, has grave concerns. Concerns for the welfare of his infant niece, and for the preservation of his family's good name. We will prove that the defendant, Sarah Miller, has engaged in a pattern of behavior so morally questionable that she is unfit to be a mother." Sarah stared straight ahead, refusing to let them see her flinch. Beneath the table, Michael's hand found hers and gave it a firm, reassuring squeeze. William was the first witness. Guided by his lawyer, he painted a picture of himself as a grieving brother, a worried uncle. "I became concerned shortly after the funeral," William said, his voice dripping with false piety. "She seemed oddly composed. Then, so soon after my brother passed, she announced she was with child. It seemed strange." "Strange how?" Caldwell pressed. "My brother, Thomas, he was a sick man," William said, shaking his head sadly. "He confided in me. He wasn't well enough for marital relations in those final months." A shocked murmur rippled through the courtroom. Sarah felt her face burn with a white-hot humiliation. "And when the child was born," William continued, "I saw her. The Miller family has had dark hair and brown eyes for generations. This child has fair hair and bright blue eyes." He let that hang in the air before adding, "And then, she abandoned my brother's homestead, moved onto the ranch of an unmarried man, Mr. Bennett, where she has been living under his roof ever since." The impropriety speaks for itself. When Sarah's lawyer, a kind older man named Mr. Haynes, whom Michael had hired, got his turn, he went straight for the throat. "Mr. Miller, you claim to be a concerned uncle, yet Sheriff Daniels and Doc Peterson have both testified that you physically assaulted Mrs. Miller while she was holding her newborn child. Is that correct?" William squirmed in his seat. "I was emotional. Upset about my brother's legacy." So upset you struck a grieving widow? Haynes pressed. Is that the action of a man fit to be a guardian? By the time William stepped down, his saintly facade was in tatters. Then it was Sarah's turn. Her legs felt like water as she walked to the stand. Mr. Haynes was gentle. Mrs. Miller, please tell the court about your marriage. Sarah took a breath, focusing on Michael's steady gaze. Thomas and I had an arrangement of mutual benefit. He was ill when we married. His condition worsened quickly. Yet you conceived a child? Yes, Sarah said, her voice clear and firm, just as they had practiced. Elizabeth is Thomas's daughter. She was born prematurely. He knew of my pregnancy before he passed, and he was thrilled. And your relationship with Mr. Bennett? Mr. Bennett is my employer, she stated plainly. He offered me a job and a safe place to live when my brother-in-law became violent. He has been a respectable and honorable friend. Finally, Michael was called. He walked to the stand with a quiet confidence that seemed to command the room. Caldwell, William's lawyer, cross-examined him, his questions dripping with insinuation. Mr. Bennett, you admit to spending numerous evenings alone with Mrs. Miller at her residence? I have joined Mrs. Miller for supper on occasion to discuss ranch business, Michael replied, his voice even. Is it not true, sir, that your interest in this young widow goes far beyond that of a mere employer? Caldwell sneered. The courtroom held its breath. All eyes were on Michael. Sarah's heart pounded. She didn't know what he would say. Michael looked directly at Judge Parker. Your Honor, he said, his voice ringing with sincerity, I have the deepest respect for Mrs. Miller. I will not deny that I hold her in the highest possible esteem. Her character, her resilience, and her love for her daughter are second to none. Any man would be honored to know her. After the final arguments, Judge Parker called for a recess. Outside, in the cool autumn air, Sarah paced. Michael, if I lose, if he gives Elizabeth to William. That will not happen, Michael said, stopping her, holding her by the shoulders. Listen to me, Sarah. Whatever the judge decides, we will face it. But there is something I must ask you. But before he could finish, the bailiff called them back inside. The verdict was in. Judge Parker stared down from the bench, his face unreadable. Having considered all testimony, he boomed, this court is ready to rule. Regarding the petition for guardianship, I find Mr. William Miller's claims of maternal unfitness to be baseless. In fact, his own documented violence toward Mrs. Miller makes him grossly unfit to be a guardian. A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled Sarah's knees washed over her. As to the matter of paternity, the judge continued, Thomas Miller acknowledged the child as his own before his death. Under the law of this territory, that establishes legal paternity. Therefore, the Miller property belongs to Elizabeth Miller, with her mother, Sarah Miller, as her legal trustee. William shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. She's a liar, a whore. That brat isn't a Miller. Silence, the judge thundered, banging his gavel. One more outburst, Mr. Miller, and you will be held in contempt. This ruling is final. Outside, in the golden sunshine, Sarah felt like she could finally breathe. William had stormed away, his lawyer trailing behind him. The cloud of fear that had hung over her for months was finally gone. Michael stood in front of her, his expression more serious than she had ever seen it. Sarah, he began, taking both of her hands in his. What I was trying to ask you before, I know the timing is unorthodox, but these past months, they've shown me what's been missing from my life. He took a deep breath, his blue eyes locking onto hers. After my wife, Rebecca, died, I never thought I could feel this way again. But you and Elizabeth, you brought the light back into my world. I don't want to be your employer, Sarah. I don't want to be just your friend. Sarah's heart began to race. She knew what was coming. I love you, Sarah Miller. I love your daughter as if she were my own blood. I want to build a life with you. I want to protect you and cherish you and make you my wife. Tears streamed down Sarah's face, but for the first time they were tears of pure joy. She thought of the lonely cabin, of William's cruelty, of the impossible choices she had faced. And she thought of this good, strong man who had seen her at her lowest and offered not pity, but respect, and then love. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Michael, I will be your wife." He pulled her into his arms right there on the courthouse steps, and as he held her close, the whispers and stares of the town faded into nothing. All that mattered was the promise of a future, a family, and a love she never thought she deserved. "You will be my queen," Michael whispered against her hair. "You and Elizabeth, my family, at last." But their story wasn't over, not by a long shot, because as they embraced, a man watched them from the shadows of the alley across the street. It was Caldwell, William's lawyer, and he wasn't smiling. He took a long drag from his cigar, his cold eyes narrowed on the happy couple. The judge's ruling wasn't a defeat, it was just a complication. He hadn't come all the way from Denver for a simple inheritance dispute. He was there because of what was under that land, something Thomas Miller had discovered just before his accident, something William was too stupid to find on his own, something worth killing for. Caldwell flicked his cigar into the dust. This was just the beginning. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of love, loss, and justice in the Old West. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from.